Hi, everybody. We had a good session recently at BRCGS Connect on food safety culture. And these are going to be the Coles notes of that session for anyone who missed it or for anyone who wanted to refresh their takeaways. The session focused on making food safety culture as simple as possible because we know that simplicity is the key to making anything work. But don't take my word for it. I'm taking a page from Einstein's book here. So the discussion included Mercè Sánchez, who is the manager for the food program at BRCGS, Rodolfo Tamez, who's the technical manager at QIMA, and myself. So there were three perspectives. Mercè provided perspective from the certification program owner, who writes the standard and lays out the expectations. Rodolfo provided a perspective from a certification body, who deals with the day-to-day reality of implementing that standard. And I brought the perspective of an instructional designer and food safety coach who helps everybody make sense of food safety and who helps make food safety work in real life. We started with the idea there are always two goals with any program. One of the goals is compliance. So we always want to tick all the boxes. We want to make sure that we comply with the expectations of the standard. The second goal is to ensure that the program works in the real world, that it meets the intent of the standard, that it's not just paperwork disconnected from reality. In other words, that the program is effective. So that's going to be true for any program, not just a food safety culture program. But in this specific case, effective means a plan that helps to build a culture that supports food safety and quality. And that's a very important point. The BRCGS standard does not set expectations for the culture itself, but rather the expectations are for having an internal process to evaluate and improve your culture. So if we get back to the idea of those two goals and carry it a step forward, we see there are three possible scenarios. Now, in some cases, the plant meets all expectations and the organization enjoys a culture that supports food safety and quality. And that's obviously the best case scenario. That's what we're hoping for everybody. Unfortunately, it's evident that not every organization has managed to get there yet. So if that's not the case, then what are the challenges? Well, there are two challenges. Some organizations have a great culture, but they don't tick all the boxes. In other words, during an audit, they likely end up with technical non-compliances related to their paperwork. The other type of challenge is where the plan ticks all the boxes, but the culture doesn't really support food safety and quality. In this case, the program is not effective. Now, of course, there's a fourth situation where the company doesn't tick the boxes and doesn't have a good culture. But that's really just a combination of the two challenges. That doesn't change the fact that we're still looking at two types of problems. Now, the point here is that these are two very different problems, and they will require two very different solutions. So we're not looking to find a silver bullet that would fix both problems. And of those two types of challenges, eliminating technical nonconformities is the easiest one to resolve. And the three of us, being very reasonable people, we started with the low-hanging fruit. So to do that, we unpacked the keywords in the standards because understanding the expectation is the path to eliminating technical nonconformities. We believe once you understand the line between compliant and non-compliant, you have what you need to develop a program that works for you. And once you have a program that works for you, then you get to decide what would help to make that program even better. So the line separating compliance from non-compliance for clause 1.1.2 in the BRCGS Food Safety Standard, issue 9, comes down to three big building blocks, three foundational components if you want. Number one, you need to have a food safety culture plan. Now, in that plan, you need to describe some actions, a timeline for each action, and how you will monitor whether the activities or the actions are effective. So that's all that needs to be included on the form. That's the backbone of your food safety culture plan, those three things. Number two, you need a process to gather feedback. Now, one point we clarified during our breakfast session is that feedback is not synonymous with survey. We often use the word survey, but that's a descriptive shortcut. It's not an expectation of the standard. There are other options you can use to satisfy the feedback requirement. It would have been really fun to unpack this one, But unfortunately, we didn't have time to do that. And that wasn't the goal of the day anyways, so we stuck to our agenda. But it's on our sites, and we'll tackle it in the future, I promise, because I think it's very interesting. Another point that Mercè mentioned is that one of the biggest gaps she sees is that the feedback and the actions don't involve all groups that have an impact on food safety. And most noticeably, top management is often missing. They're conspicuous by their absence. And when it comes to food safety culture, it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to see that top management's absence speaks louder than their presence ever could. And number 3, you need to review the plan at least annually. Now, with those 3 foundational pieces in mind, we're set to outline the simplest program that would meet those expectations. Basically, you need to have a plan, you need to have a process to gather feedback, and you need to review that plan at least annually. If you have those 3 elements, you tick all the boxes. Well, that's the shape of the program if you want. But what about the content? An empty container is obviously not enough. You can't show anyone a blank form. So what should those actions be? And how many do you need? Well, obviously the standard is not going to tell you what actions you need to take. The key term they use is those actions need to be designed around. They need to consider, if you want, a list of elements. So this is not a checklist for things in the plan. Now, just a side note here, we didn't specifically talk about the implications of the expression designed around, which is definitely not a common expression in food safety standards. So what I'm going to say is subject to confirmation. And we'll get back to that in another video where we unpack a few things people mistakenly read into the standard by taking things farther than what's in the written requirements. But for now, let's say that the actions should consider or should be designed around all the elements on this list. How many actions should be in your plan? Well, the standard doesn't specify. And we did discuss this to bring some clarity. The result of the discussion is if you tick all the boxes with 1 action, well, that's cool. Now, if you want to do 10 actions, it's also cool. It's up to you. Now, if you put 10 actions on the plan, though, you need to deliver on all 10. So 10 is not as simple as less than 10. I'm just saying. One might be too simple on the other way, but maybe not. And again, we could go deep on this one, so we'll relegate that to a further discussion. But we'll come back to it because that one's also very interesting. Now, another point we clarified is whether the action or the actions need to focus on gaps. And basically, the relationship between the 3 parts are, when you do a review of your food safety culture plan, during that review, you identify gaps, you plan actions to bridge those gaps, you implement those actions, you gather feedback during, before, and after implementation all along, and all of that information gets fed into your review. And with that, you make the plan for the next cycle. So that's how the 3 parts should work together. So there you have it. What constitutes a food safety culture plan, a few tips from our discussion on how to make it work in the most basic way possible, and a few clarifying points. We've taken the liberty of pulling together a few resources based on our breakfast discussion, and you can find them here. Thanks for joining us and for engaging with us on food safety culture. Finally, initially I was hoping to unpack one of these examples during the breakfast session as a practical case study. We didn't have time to do that, but we're going to do that next.